The train whistle echoed through the Colorado mountains as Eleanor Hartwell pressed her face against the dusty window. Her reflection stared back, pale skin, worried green eyes, and auburn hair pinned in a simple style that spoke of careful economy rather than fashion. The letter in her gloved hands had been read so many times the paper felt soft as cloth. Seeking respectable woman for marriage. Must be hardy, willing to work, and not given to foolish notions. Mountain life is hard but honest. Send photograph if suitable. The signature read simply J. McKenna, Copper Ridge, Colorado. Eleanor had responded 3 months ago from her cramped boarding house room in Chicago, where she worked 16-hour days in a textile factory for barely enough to survive. The recent fire at the factory had left dozens without work, including her. When James McKenna's reply came with a train ticket and a brief note saying arrive October 15th. We'll meet you at the station, she had no choice but to accept. The conductor's voice boomed through the car. Copper Ridge, next stop. End of the line. Eleanor gathered her worn carpetbag and smoothed her best dress, a simple brown wool that had seen better days but was clean and mended. As the train pulled into the small mountain station, she scanned the platform for someone who might be her intended husband. The station was little more than a wooden platform with a tiny building. Only a handful of people waited, an elderly man with packages, 2 miners with dirt-stained clothes, and a woman with 3 small children. No one approached as Eleanor stepped onto the platform with her single bag. Miss Hartwell? She turned to see a boy of perhaps 14, thin and nervous-looking. Yes, that's me. I'm Tommy Breslin. Mr. McKenna sent me to fetch you. He couldn't come himself on account of some trouble up at the ridge. Eleanor's heart sank. Already her intended husband was sending others to collect her like a package. What sort of trouble? Tommy shifted uncomfortably. Well, miss, there's been some talk about Mr. McKenna in town lately. Folks are saying he might not be the respectable type after all. What do you mean? The boy looked around nervously. Some say he's been running with outlaws. There was a stagecoach robbery 2 weeks back, and some witnesses thought they recognized his horse. Sheriff's been asking questions. Eleanor felt the world tilt beneath her feet. She had traveled 1,000 miles to marry a man who might be a criminal. But she had nowhere to go back to and no money for another train ticket even if she wanted to leave. Where is Mr. McKenna now? She asked quietly. Up at his cabin on Copper Ridge. It's about an hour's ride. I got a wagon waiting. Eleanor looked around the small town, a few buildings, a general store, a saloon, and not much else. Everyone seemed to be watching her with curious and slightly pitying expressions. Word traveled fast in small places. Tommy, she said carefully, what do you think? About Mr. McKenna, I mean. Do you know him well? The boy considered this seriously. I've known him for 2 years, since he came to Copper Ridge. He's always been fair with me, pays me honest for the work I do. Never seen him be cruel or mean. But he keeps to himself mostly, and that makes folks suspicious. Eleanor made her decision. She had come this far, and she needed to see this through. Take me to him. The wagon ride up the mountain was rough and steep. Tommy proved to be good company, chattering about the town, the mining operations, and local gossip. Eleanor learned that James McKenna had arrived in Copper Ridge 2 years ago with enough money to buy a good piece of land and build a solid cabin. He kept horses and did some trading, but no one knew exactly where his money came from. Some folks think he might be running from something back east, Tommy said as they climbed higher into the pine forests. Others say he found gold somewhere and is keeping quiet about it. And now with this robbery business. The cabin came into view as they rounded a bend, a solid log structure with a stone chimney, well built and larger than Eleanor had expected. Gardens and outbuildings showed signs of careful maintenance. Whatever James McKenna might be, he wasn't lazy. A man emerged from the barn as they approached. Eleanor's breath caught in her throat. James McKenna was nothing like she had imagined from his terse letters. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair and intense blue eyes. But it was the way he moved that caught her attention, with the careful alertness of someone always ready for trouble. He helped her down from the wagon with surprising gentleness. "Miss Hartwell, I apologize for not meeting you at the station myself. There were matters that required my attention." His voice was deep and educated, not the rough mountain accent she had expected. Eleanor found herself studying his face, looking for signs of the outlaw others suspected him to be. "Thank you for sending Tommy. He was very kind." James McKenna nodded to the boy, who unloaded Eleanor's bag and climbed back onto the wagon. "I'll be back in a few days to check if you need anything from town," Tommy called as he drove away. An awkward silence fell between them as they stood outside the cabin. Eleanor realized she was alone in the mountains with a man she didn't know, who might be a criminal. "You've heard the talk," James said quietly. "It wasn't a question." "Some of it." "And you came anyway." Eleanor lifted her chin. "I came to fulfill our agreement, Mr. McKenna. I intend to honor my word unless you give me reason not to." Something flickered in his eyes, surprise, perhaps, or approval. "You should know what you're dealing with before you make any decisions. Come inside, and I'll tell you what I can." The interior of the cabin surprised her again. It was clean and well-furnished, with books on the shelves and quality furniture that spoke of education and refinement. A fire crackled in the stone fireplace, and the smell of coffee filled the air. "Sit down," James said, gesturing to a comfortable chair. "I'll get you something to eat. You must be tired from the journey." Eleanor watched him move around the kitchen area with practiced efficiency. Everything about him contradicted the rough mountain man she had expected to marry. "You're wondering if the stories are true," he said as he set a plate of bread and cheese before her. "Are they?" James McKenna sat across from her, his hands wrapped around a coffee cup. "That depends on how you define truth, Miss Hartwell. I have done things that some would consider outside the law. But I have never harmed an innocent person or taken anything that wasn't already stolen from those who earned it honestly." Eleanor felt her pulse quicken. "That sounds like the words of someone who justifies robbery." "Perhaps it is." His blue eyes met hers steadily. 2 years ago, I worked for a mining company back east. I discovered they were cheating their workers out of wages and selling equipment that they knew was dangerous. When I tried to expose them, they framed me for theft and put a price on my head." "So you became an actual thief?" "I became someone who takes back what was stolen from honest working people. The stagecoach that was robbed 2 weeks ago was carrying money that belonged to the same mining company, profits made from the blood and sweat of men who died in unsafe mines." Eleanor set down her coffee cup carefully. "And you think that justifies it?" "I think justice sometimes has to be taken when it won't be given." James leaned back in his chair. "But I won't lie to you, Eleanor. If you marry me, you'll be marrying a man that the law considers an outlaw. I can't promise you safety or respectability." The use of her first name sent an unexpected warmth through her. Eleanor realized she was facing a choice that would determine the course of her entire life. "What can you promise me?" she asked. "That I will never raise a hand to you in anger. That you will never want for food or shelter as long as I draw breath. That I will defend you against anyone who tries to harm you." His voice was quiet but firm. "And that I will give you the chance to leave if you ever want to go." Eleanor studied his face in the firelight. There was something about James McKenna that called to her despite the danger he represented. Perhaps it was the way he spoke of justice, or the careful way he had built this home, or simply the loneliness she recognized in his eyes. "I have a confession of my own," she said finally. "I didn't come here just to fulfill our agreement. I came because I had nowhere else to go. The factory where I worked burned down, and I have no family left." "You're not the only one running from something. What are you running from?" "Poverty. Hopelessness. The kind of life where you work until you die and never have anything to show for it." Eleanor met his gaze. "Maybe that makes me selfish, but I'm tired of being afraid and hungry and alone." James McKenna was quiet for a long moment. Then, we understand each other. Do we? Because I need to know something, James. If I stay here, if I marry you, will you continue this outlaw business? There's one more job I have to finish. After that. He paused. After that, I'd like to try building something instead of taking it back. Eleanor felt something shift inside her chest. Despite everything, the danger, the uncertainty, the criminal accusations, she found herself wanting to stay. Not just because she had no other choice, but because something about this man and his strange code of honor appealed to her. How long do I have to decide? As long as you need. But, Eleanor, you should know that there are people looking for me. It may not be safe here much longer. A sound outside made them both freeze. Hoofbeats on the mountain trail, coming fast. James was on his feet instantly, moving to the window with the fluid motion of someone accustomed to danger. 3 riders, he said quietly. Armed. Eleanor's heart began to pound. The law? No. These are private men. Probably bounty hunters. James moved to a cabinet and withdrew a rifle, checking it with practiced efficiency. Eleanor, there's a root cellar behind the kitchen with an outside entrance. I want you to go there now and stay hidden until this is over. What are you going to do? What I have to do. His voice was grim. These men aren't here to arrest me. They're here to collect a bounty, and they don't care if they take me alive or dead. The hoofbeats were closer now. Eleanor could hear voices calling out, harsh and demanding. James McKenna. We know you're in there. Come out with your hands up. James looked at Eleanor, and she saw something in his eyes that made her decision for her. Whatever else he might be, this man was prepared to defend her with his life. I'm not going to hide, she said quietly. Eleanor, these are dangerous men. Then, you'll need all the help you can get. She moved to stand beside him at the window. What do you want me to do? James McKenna stared at her for a moment, then smiled, the first real smile she had seen from him. There's a shotgun in the bedroom closet. Do you know how to use one? Eleanor thought of the hunting trips with her father before he died, before the factory and the poverty and the desperate journey west. I do. Then, welcome to Copper Ridge, Mrs. McKenna. The riders were circling the cabin now, and Eleanor could see their faces in the lamplight streaming from the windows. Hard men with cold eyes and guns already drawn. One of them was shouting demands while the others positioned themselves to cover all the exits. Eleanor found the shotgun and checked the load, her hands steady despite her racing heart. When she returned to the main room, James was crouched by the front window, rifle ready. Whatever happens, he said without looking at her, know that I'm grateful you stayed. Don't talk like that, Eleanor replied, taking position at the side window. We're going to get through this. The first shot shattered the front window, sending glass flying across the room. James returned fire immediately, and Eleanor heard a cry of pain from outside. The battle for Copper Ridge had begun, and Eleanor Hartwell found herself fighting alongside the outlaw she had come to marry. As gunshots echoed through the mountain night, Eleanor realized that her old life was truly over. Whatever came next, there would be no going back to the safety of the world she had known. She was committed now, for better or worse, to the dangerous path that James McKenna walked. And, despite the terror of the moment, she found that she had never felt more alive. The gunfight lasted through most of the night. Eleanor had never experienced anything like the deafening roar of weapons, the acrid smell of gunpowder, and the constant fear that the next bullet might find its mark. She and James worked together with surprising efficiency, covering each other as they moved between windows and took careful shots at the bounty hunters positioned around the cabin. By dawn, 2 of the 3 attackers lay dead in the yard, and the third had fled wounded into the forest. Eleanor sat on the floor of the cabin, her back against the wall, still clutching the shotgun. Her hands trembled now that the immediate danger had passed. James moved through the cabin, checking the damage and ensuring no one else was approaching. His shirt was torn and bloody from a grazing bullet wound on his shoulder, but he seemed otherwise unharmed. Are you hurt? He asked, kneeling beside Eleanor. she shook her head, unable to trust her voice for a moment. When she finally spoke, her words surprised even her. "I killed a man tonight." "You defended yourself." "There's a difference." "Is there?" Eleanor looked up at him. "Because I don't feel guilty about it. I feel relieved." "What does that make me?" James studied her face carefully. "It makes you a survivor. And it makes you someone I can trust to watch my back." Eleanor stood up slowly, setting the shotgun aside. "Those men, they weren't lawmen, were they?" "No. They were hired killers working for the mining company. The price on my head is high enough to attract the worst kind of men." James moved to the shattered front window and looked out at the bodies in the yard. "This won't be the last time, Eleanor. They'll keep coming until they get me or until I finish what I started." "What exactly did you start?" James was quiet for a long moment, then moved to a loose floorboard near the fireplace. He pried it up and withdrew a metal strongbox. Inside were papers, photographs, and a substantial amount of money. "The mining company I worked for wasn't just cheating workers," he said, spreading the documents on the table. "They were systematically murdering anyone who tried to organize for better conditions. Look at this." Eleanor examined the papers, correspondence between company officials discussing the best ways to eliminate troublemakers, lists of workers marked for death, and photographs of mining accidents that were clearly sabotage. "My God," she whispered. "How many people died?" "Dozens. Maybe more. I gathered this evidence over months, planning to take it to the territorial authorities. But the company found out and framed me first. Now they want me dead before I can expose them." Eleanor felt a chill that had nothing to do with the mountain air. "And you've been robbing their shipments?" "Taking back what they stole from dead men's families, yes. And gathering more evidence." James pulled out a photograph that made Eleanor gasp. It showed a mining office, but in the background she could see several men she recognized from descriptions in newspapers, territorial officials who were supposed to be investigating mining safety. "The corruption goes higher than just the company," James continued. "That's why I haven't been able to go to the law. Half the territorial government is in their pocket." Eleanor sank into a chair, overwhelmed by the scope of what James was telling her. "So what's the plan? Keep robbing them until they stop sending killers?" "No. There's one more job, like I told you. The company is shipping their complete records to their headquarters back east next week. Everything: financial records, correspondence, evidence of the murders. If I can get those documents, you could expose the whole conspiracy. I could prove what they've done and maybe get justice for the men who died." James gathered up the papers and returned them to the strongbox. "But it means hitting a heavily guarded train, and it means doing it soon before they realize how much I know." Eleanor stared at him. "You're asking me to help you rob a train." "I'm not asking you anything. I'm telling you what I have to do, and you can decide if you want to be part of it." The cabin fell silent except for the crackling of the fire. Eleanor walked to the broken window and looked out at the mountains, trying to process everything that had happened in the past 24 hours. She had come here expecting to marry a simple mountain man, and instead she had found herself in the middle of a war between a principled outlaw and a murderous corporation. "If you succeed," she said finally, "if you get this evidence and expose them, what happens then?" "Then I stop running and start building the life I want." "With me?" James moved to stand behind her, close enough that she could feel the warmth of his body. "If you'll have me. But, Eleanor, I need you to understand what you'd be choosing. Even if we succeed, there will always be people who remember James McKenna as an outlaw. We might have to leave Colorado, start over somewhere else." Eleanor turned to face him. "And if you fail?" "Then I'll probably die, and you'll be free to go back to whatever life you can make for yourself." The blunt honesty of his words hit her like a physical blow. Eleanor realized that in the space of one night, this man had become important to her in ways she hadn't expected. "There's something I need to know," she said. Last night, when those men were shooting at us, you could have told me to run. You could have used the distraction to escape yourself. Why didn't you? James reached up to touch her face gently. Because somewhere between the train station and this moment, you stopped being just a mail-order bride to me. You became someone worth protecting. Eleanor felt her heart skip a beat. James. I know it's fast. I know this isn't what you signed up for. But I can't pretend I don't feel something for you, Eleanor. You stayed when you could have run. You fought beside me when you could have hidden. That means something. Eleanor found herself leaning into his touch. It means I'm probably as crazy as you are. Maybe. Or maybe we're both just tired of being alone. The sound of hoofbeats interrupted them again, but this time it was just Tommy Breslin riding up on his horse. He dismounted and ran to the cabin, his eyes wide as he took in the broken windows and the bodies in the yard. Mr. McKenna. Are you all right? I heard shooting all night. We're fine, Tommy. But I need you to do something for me. James handed the boy a letter he quickly wrote. Take this to Sheriff Morrison in Leadville. Tell him James McKenna wants to make a deal. Eleanor stared at him in shock. You're turning yourself in? No. I'm offering to trade information for protection. Morrison is one of the few lawmen in the territory who can't be bought. If I can convince him to listen. Tommy took the letter and climbed back on his horse. I'll ride hard, Mr. McKenna. Should be back by tomorrow night. After the boy left, Eleanor and James spent the day cleaning up the cabin and burying the dead bounty hunters. It was grim work, but it gave Eleanor time to think about her situation. That evening, as they sat by the fire sharing a simple dinner, Eleanor made her decision. I want to help you with the train job, she said. James nearly choked on his coffee. Eleanor, that's not necessary. You've done enough. No, I haven't. Those documents you showed me, the evidence of what the company did to those miners. I've seen what poverty and corporate greed can do to working people. I spent years watching it destroy lives in the factories back east. Eleanor set down her cup and looked directly at him. If there's a chance to stop these men from killing more innocent people, I want to take it. It's dangerous. More dangerous than last night. Then, teach me what I need to know. James studied her face for a long moment. Why, Eleanor? Really, why? Eleanor considered the question seriously. Because for the first time in my life, I have a chance to fight for something that matters instead of just surviving. And, because. She hesitated, then forged ahead. Because I think I'm falling in love with you, James McKenna, and I'll be damned if I'm going to lose you to those corporate murderers without a fight. James was very still for a moment, then he smiled that rare, genuine smile again. In that case, Mrs. McKenna, let me tell you about the Denver and Rio Grande Railway's security procedures. They spent the next 2 hours planning. The train carrying the company documents would pass through Devil's Canyon in 5 days, a narrow passage where it would have to slow down significantly. James had been watching the route for weeks, learning the guards' patterns and timing. The key is speed and surprise, he explained, sketching the canyon layout on a piece of paper. We stop the train, get to the mail car where they're keeping the documents, and get out before reinforcements can arrive. How do we stop a train? There's a technique involving rocks on the tracks and signal fires. Nothing that will hurt anyone, just force them to halt. James looked up at her. But, Eleanor, once we do this, there's no going back. We'll be committed outlaws until we can get those documents to someone who can use them. Eleanor reached across the table and took his hand. Then, we better make sure we succeed. The next afternoon, Tommy returned with Sheriff Morrison's reply. Eleanor watched James's face as he read the letter, trying to gauge the response. Well, she asked. Morrison will meet with me, but only if I surrender myself first. He won't make any deals with an active outlaw. James crumpled the letter in frustration. It's not enough. By the time I could convince him to listen, the company will have moved their records and probably killed anyone else who might testify against them. So we stick with the original plan. We stick with the original plan. That night, Eleanor lay awake on the small bed James had given her while he slept on the floor by the fire. She thought about her life before, the endless factory work, the cramped boarding house, the constant struggle just to survive. Then, she thought about the past few days, the danger, yes, but also the sense of purpose and the unexpected connection she felt with James. She had come to Colorado looking for security and respectability. Instead, she had found passion and purpose, even if it came with the price of becoming an outlaw herself. As she drifted off to sleep, Eleanor realized that for all the danger and uncertainty, she had never been happier. Tomorrow they would begin preparing for the most dangerous thing she had ever attempted, but tonight she was exactly where she belonged. The next morning brought news that changed everything. Tommy arrived early with word from town the train schedule had been moved up. Instead of passing through Devil's Canyon in 5 days, it would be there tomorrow night. "We're not ready," Eleanor said, feeling panic rise in her chest. James was already moving, gathering supplies and checking weapons. "We'll have to be ready. This might be our only chance." Eleanor spent the day learning everything James could teach her about stopping trains, handling dynamite, and shooting accurately from horseback. By evening, she felt as prepared as she could be in such a short time. As they made final preparations for the robbery, James pulled her aside. "Eleanor, I need you to promise me something. If this goes wrong, if I don't make it, you take the evidence we already have and get it to someone who can use it. Don't try to save me." Eleanor looked into his eyes. "I promise to get the evidence to safety. But I'm not promising to abandon you." "Eleanor." "No." She reached up and kissed him, surprising them both with the intensity of emotion behind it. "We're in this together, remember? Whatever happens tomorrow, we face it together." James held her close, and Eleanor felt the last of her doubts disappear. She had found her place in the world, dangerous as it might be, and she wasn't going to give it up without a fight. Tomorrow would bring the train robbery that would either make them heroes or get them killed. But tonight, she was exactly where she wanted to be, in the arms of the man she had come to love, preparing to fight for justice in a world that seemed to have forgotten what the word meant. The train approached Devil's Canyon just after sunset, its headlight cutting through the gathering darkness. Eleanor crouched behind a boulder overlooking the tracks, her heart pounding so hard she was sure the engineer would hear it from the locomotive cab. Beside her, James checked his pocket watch one final time. "Remember," he whispered, "we're not here to hurt anyone. Get the documents and get out." Eleanor nodded, gripping her rifle. They had spent hours going over the plan. James would use dynamite to block the tracks ahead of the train while Eleanor covered the guards from her position on the ridge. Once the train stopped, they would move quickly to the mail car, retrieve the company documents, and escape into the maze of canyons before reinforcements could arrive. The train whistle echoed off the canyon walls as the locomotive rounded the final curve. James lit the fuse on his dynamite charge and rolled it onto the tracks, then sprinted back to cover. The explosion shattered the evening quiet, sending rocks and debris flying. The train's brakes screamed against the rails as the engineer fought to stop before hitting the obstruction. Everything happened exactly as planned at first. The train halted with a great hiss of steam, and confused shouts rose from the passenger cars. James emerged from cover with his hands raised, calling out to the guards. "Nobody needs to get hurt here. We just want what's in the mail car." But, as Eleanor watched through her rifle sights, she realized something was wrong. Too many armed men were emerging from the train cars, far more than should have been on a normal freight run. This wasn't just a train carrying mail and passengers. It was a trap. "James," she shouted in warning, but it was too late. Gunfire erupted from multiple directions as company guards poured out of what had appeared to be ordinary passenger cars. James dove behind the locomotive for cover, returning fire, but Eleanor could see he was badly outnumbered. She began picking off guards from her elevated position, her rifle barking repeatedly as she tried to even the odds. But more men kept appearing, and she realized they had walked into an ambush specifically designed to capture or kill James McKenna. A bullet sparked off the rock near her head, and Eleanor ducked as she spotted a guard climbing toward her position. She swung her rifle around and fired, watching the man tumble back down the slope, but movement from another direction caught her eye. They were trying to surround James's position near the locomotive. In moments, he would be trapped with no avenue of escape. Eleanor made a decision that would have seemed impossible to her just a week ago. Abandoning her safe position on the ridge, she charged down the slope toward the train, firing as she ran and screaming like a banshee to confuse the guards and draw their attention away from James. Her desperate gambit worked. Several guards turned their weapons toward her, giving James the opening he needed to break from cover and fight his way toward the mail car. Eleanor rolled behind a pile of railroad ties, bullets whining overhead, and tried to reload her rifle with shaking hands. "The mail car!" James shouted to her over the gunfire. "The documents are in the mail car." Eleanor saw him sprinting along the side of the train, using the passenger cars for cover. She laid down covering fire, forcing the guards to keep their heads down. But, as James reached the mail car, more armed men emerged from hiding places among the rocks. The fight became a running battle through the narrow canyon. Eleanor and James moved from cover to cover, fighting their way toward their horses while company guards seemed to emerge from everywhere. It was clear now that the mining company had anticipated this robbery and prepared accordingly. "There!" James pointed to a gap between two boulders where they had hidden their horses. "Make for the horses." They ran together, bullets kicking up dirt around their feet. Eleanor felt a burning sensation along her arm as a bullet grazed her, but she kept running. Behind them, she could hear the guards organizing a pursuit. They reached the horses just as mounted company men appeared at the mouth of the canyon, cutting off their planned escape route. James swore and pulled Eleanor toward a narrow trail that led up the canyon wall. "This way. It's rougher, but it's our only chance." They abandoned the horses and began climbing the steep trail on foot. The company men were forced to pursue on foot as well, since the trail was too narrow and treacherous for horses. Eleanor's lungs burned as they climbed higher into the mountains, but fear and determination drove her forward. Behind them, gunshots and angry shouts echoed off the canyon walls. The guards were following, but the darkness and difficult terrain slowed their pursuit. "There's a cave about a mile ahead," James gasped as they paused for breath behind a stand of pine trees. "We can hide there until they give up looking." "What about the documents?" Eleanor asked, checking the wound on her arm. It was painful but not serious. James patted a leather satchel strapped across his chest. "Got them." The mail car was exactly where my information said it would be. Eleanor stared at him in amazement. "You mean we actually succeeded?" "The first part, anyway. Now we have to get these documents to someone who can use them without getting killed in the process." They resumed climbing, moving as quietly as possible through the darkness. The cave James had mentioned turned out to be a deep cleft in the rocks, well hidden and defensible. They crawled inside and settled down to wait, listening for sounds of pursuit. Hours passed before they felt safe enough to examine what they had stolen. By the light of a carefully shielded candle, James spread out the contents of the satchel. Eleanor's eyes widened as she saw the scope of evidence they had recovered. Financial records showing payments to territorial officials. Correspondence detailing plans to murder union organizers. Photographs of deliberate mining accidents. And, most damning of all, a complete list of government officials who were receiving bribes to look the other way. "My God," Eleanor whispered. "This goes all the way to the territorial capital." "Higher than that," James said grimly, pointing to a letter bearing an official Washington seal. Some of these bribes were authorized by federal officials. Eleanor felt overwhelmed by the magnitude of the corruption they had uncovered. "Who can we trust with this? If the corruption goes this high?" "There's one man. A newspaper editor in Denver named William Harrison. He's been trying to investigate the mining companies for years, but he's never had proof like this." James carefully gathered the documents back into the satchel. "If we can get these to him, When, Eleanor corrected. When we get these to him. James smiled at her determination. When we get these to him, he'll publish everything. The story will be picked up by newspapers back east, and there will be too much public attention for the officials to cover it up. They spent the rest of the night in the cave, taking turns keeping watch. As dawn broke, they could see company guards still searching the area below, but they seemed to be moving away from the cave's location. We'll wait until full daylight, James decided. Then, we'll make our way to where we left the spare horses. Eleanor used the time to think about what would happen next. If they successfully delivered the documents and exposed the conspiracy, James would no longer be a hunted outlaw. But what kind of life could they build together? She was no longer the respectable woman who had answered his advertisement for a mail-order bride. James, she said quietly, what happens to us after this is over? He looked up from cleaning his rifle. What do you want to happen? I want to marry you. Not because of some arrangement through the mail, but because I choose to. Because I love you. James set down his rifle and moved to sit beside her. Eleanor, you've seen what my life is like. Even if we clear my name, there will always be people who remember James McKenna the outlaw. Are you sure that's what you want? Eleanor thought about her old life, the factory work, the poverty, the endless struggle just to survive. Then, she thought about the past week, the danger, yes, but also the sense of purpose and the deep connection she felt with this man who risked everything to fight for justice. I've never been more sure of anything in my life. James pulled her close and kissed her, and Eleanor felt as if she were finally home after a lifetime of wandering. They left the cave at midday, moving carefully through the forest toward their hidden horses. The company guards had moved their search further down the canyon, apparently convinced that their quarry had escaped in that direction. The ride to Denver took 2 days, traveling by back trails and avoiding main roads. They passed through small mining towns where Eleanor could see the results of the company's policies, workers living in poverty while their bosses grew rich, families devastated by accidents that could have been prevented, communities too afraid to speak out against the powerful mining interests. William Harrison's newspaper office was in a busy part of downtown Denver. Eleanor waited outside with the horses while James went in to meet with the editor. Through the window, she could see the two men in intense discussion as James spread out the stolen documents. When James emerged, his expression was grim but determined. Harrison will publish everything, he told Eleanor as they mounted their horses. But, he warned me that the company will try to have us killed before the story can make a real impact. We need to find somewhere safe to wait this out. I know a place, Eleanor said, surprising him. My aunt has a farm in Kansas. She's been writing to me for years, asking me to visit. If we can get there. Kansas it is, then. Mrs. McKenna. Eleanor's heart leaped at the title. Are we really married now? Just like that? In every way that matters to me. But, if you want a proper ceremony. I want whatever you want, James McKenna. They rode out of Denver as the first edition of Harrison's newspaper hit the streets. Behind them, the story that would bring down one of the most corrupt mining operations in the territory was beginning to spread. Ahead lay an uncertain future, but they would face it together. 6 months later, Eleanor stood in the garden of her aunt's farm in Kansas, reading the letter that had just arrived from Colorado. The investigation sparked by Harrison's newspaper story had resulted in dozens of arrests, including 3 territorial officials and a federal judge. The mining company had been dissolved, and its assets were being used to compensate the families of workers who had been killed. James McKenna had been officially pardoned and his name cleared. The man the territory had once considered an outlaw was now being hailed as a hero who had risked everything to expose corruption and save lives. James himself was chopping wood behind the farmhouse, having taken to farming life with the same determined efficiency he had once applied to planning train robberies. Eleanor watched him work, marveling at how much her life had changed since that terrifying day when she stepped off the train in Copper Ridge. She heard the sound of a wagon approaching and looked up to see Tommy Breslin driving up the lane. The boy had traveled all the way from Colorado to bring them news and to deliver the mail that had been accumulating for them. Mrs. McKenna! Tommy called out, jumping down from the wagon. Wait until you hear what's been happening back home. Eleanor smiled at the title. She and James had been married by the local minister 3 months ago, in a simple ceremony attended by her aunt and the neighboring farming families who had welcomed them into their community. As Tommy shared the latest news from Colorado, the trials, the reforms, the new safety regulations that were being implemented in the remaining mines, Eleanor felt a deep sense of satisfaction. They had risked everything to fight for justice, and they had won. James joined them, wiping sweat from his forehead. Any word from Harrison? He's won some kind of journalism award for the mining company story, Tommy reported excitedly. And he said to tell you that he's working on exposing corruption in the railroad companies now. He could use some help from someone who knows how to gather evidence. Eleanor saw the spark of interest in James's eyes and smiled. Are you thinking of becoming a professional reformer, Mr. McKenna? I'm thinking that there are a lot of powerful people who need someone to hold them accountable, James replied. But only if my wife approves. Eleanor thought about the safe, quiet life they could have as farmers in Kansas. Then, she thought about all the people who were still suffering under corrupt officials and greedy corporations. I think the world needs more people willing to fight for what's right, she said. But, next time, let's try to do it without getting shot at. James laughed and pulled her close. I love you, Eleanor McKenna. I love you too, she replied, looking into his eyes. Now and always. As the sun set over the Kansas prairie, Eleanor reflected on the journey that had brought her here. She had answered an advertisement for a mail-order bride seeking safety and security. Instead, she had found love, purpose, and a partner who shared her determination to make the world a better place. It hadn't been the life she had planned, but it was the life she had chosen. And she couldn't imagine wanting anything else. The outlaw and his bride had found their happy ending, not in the safety of anonymity, but in the dangerous and rewarding work of fighting for justice. Together, they would continue to challenge corruption and defend the innocent, knowing that some things were worth any risk. Eleanor McKenna had finally found where she belonged.